Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Icon Online. And I would just like to take a minute so we can just note that everything is as it should be. As soon as the countdown video stopped, everything is as it should be. And that is all thanks to Dan, who is over here, who, is my personal tech person. So anyway, so let's celebrate that. It's awesome. We didn't have any technical difficulties this morning, so we are already off to a really great start. He's okay. Saw him going for the sound effects. Here it comes. Oh, well, anyway, as people are continuing to get on, welcome. Good morning. It's so great to see all of you in the chat and to be able to spend our Sunday morning together. Okay, so in a couple of minutes, we'll go ahead and get started with our service today, which includes Arlene's going to lead us in a time of worship. And then today, we are going to be talking about the names of God and what that means for us and how we can find meaning and wholeness and joy and peace in the ways that God shows up in our own lives. And so we're going to get into that here in a couple of minutes. But first, just to kind of take care of our typical orders of business that we have. First of all, if you are new, if you've just started watching and you have not yet had the opportunity to fill out a Connect card, we would love to invite you to do that. Especially right now, this is good because we're actually transitioning to a new church software program. And so we are kind of in the process of redoing our database a little bit. So if you haven't filled one out yet, we would love to invite you to do so. It's just so that we can have some contact information for you, so we can send you email updates on what all the things that we have going on around Icon. So for instance, next Sunday, we will be having our March in-person service at Buck's Backyard. So that will be included in that email. Anything we have going on for kids or for youth or any events that we're a part of or special services we're doing, all of those things are included in that email. So go ahead and fill that card out if you hadn't had a chance to do that yet. And then secondly, we are going to also into the chat and in the comments post the ability for you to be able to give if you would like to give. Thank you to all of you who continue to give faithfully and generously to Icon. It is just so appreciated. It's how the church continues, is by all of us coming together with our resources and giving what we're able. And so thank you all for doing that. And like we say every week, I just want to remind everyone that we also want to be able to come alongside you and to help you in any way. If there are some financial needs that you have, maybe there's, things are tight. We've all been there. We've all had seasons in our life when we could just really use someone coming alongside us and helping us out a little bit. So if that's you, if you have some needs that you are unsure how you're going to meet, we would love to be able to partner with you to help meet those needs in any way that we can. So feel free to send us an email at info@iconchurch.com. Let us know what those needs are, and then we can get in touch with you and we can chat and assess those needs and figure out how we can best come alongside you. So here in a second, we are going to go ahead and go into a time of worship with Arlene. So whatever feels comfortable for you, if you want to sing along, if you want to just kind of sit in silence and reflect and meditate. If for you, maybe you are someone who has dealt with, has been kind of walking through maybe some kind of a tumultuous relationship with the church. Maybe you've been hurt by the church in the past, and maybe worship music is something that's difficult for you to engage in. I just want you to know that's okay. And if you need to turn the sound down or turn it off and come back in a couple of minutes, that is totally okay too. So we just want to invite you in whatever way feels comfortable to go ahead and engage in that. And also, if you could use some prayer, if you just need someone to be able to pray alongside you, to agree with you in prayer for those things that you want to bring before God, you can also click on the prayer button in the chat, and it will take you to a separate window where one of our hosts can meet you and can pray with you. I know that's one thing that that I miss about gathering in person regularly is those moments of being able to have face-to-face connection. But we can do that virtually too. We can make that work and do that virtually. So if you need some prayer, we'd love to be able to pray with you this morning. Okay, we're going to go ahead now and go into a time of worship, and then after that, we'll come back here for the message. So let's go ahead and spend a few minutes in worship together.
Let the king of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, here's my song. Let the king of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, here's my song, 'cause you are good, oh, you are good, oh, you are good, you're good, oh,
actually really, really love that song. I love just anything that can bring me back and remind me of God's goodness. Just really speaks to my heart. So thank you, Arlene, for leading us in that time. And now we're going to go ahead and jump into today's message. Actually, several nights ago, I was, lately I've been having kind of a hard time sleeping. And have been waking up quite frequently in the middle of the night, sometimes on my own, sometimes because we have animals who like to wake me up in the middle of the night. But there was one night where I was, having a hard time falling asleep, and so my mind started thinking about the direction that I wanted to take the message for today, and I just started thinking about this idea of the different names of God that we find in Scripture, and how there are so many of them, and God is called by so many names, and oh my gosh, okay. No one can see it, but literally, this is one of the animals that wakes me up in the middle of the night sometimes. This is Franklin. He wanted to be a part and join in with the icon experience this morning. All right, we're gonna go put him somewhere so that he leaves me alone. You guys, it really does feel like it feels like that sometimes around here. Like we're just in a circus. That's what my house feels like, and this is coming to you live from my house. So welcome to our circus. But anyways, one of the things I think that captivates me so much about God and about this idea of God having all of these different names and attributes that are attributed to God is how God is so many things to so many people and shows up in different ways to us at different times in our lives when we need God to show up in those ways. And as we read through the scriptures, we see a myriad of metaphors and descriptions that people attribute to the divine. For millennia, the people of God have been using language and imagery and art and poetry and music to attempt to define who God is and what God is like. And I would actually love, as we're starting off this morning, I would love in the comments if you would share maybe some words or metaphors or descriptions that come to mind for you when you think about who God is. Just whatever comes to mind. Maybe you're right now, you're struggling to connect with God. So maybe God feels distant. You can share that. Or maybe there's certain ways that God is showing up in your life and you want to share those things. But if you feel comfortable, I would love for you to share those in the chat. But we've talked about this before, and I've said this multiple times on Sunday mornings, but who we believe God to be, what we think God is like, matters a whole lot. Because as people of faith, the way that we show up in the world most often comes from who we believe God to be. And so who we understand God to be matters because it reflects in the way that we live in the world. It reflects in the way that we treat people. It reflects in the way that we speak to ourselves and the way that we go throughout and live our life. And even, our own perspective about our own circumstances and where we're at internally is heavily affected by who we believe God to be. And if God really is who we believe God to be and is bigger than anything we can imagine and exceeds any explanation or metaphor or gender or idea or description, then it only makes sense that there would be many, many ways to describe who God is to each one of us. And God also tends to show up in different ways at different times in our lives. So given all of this, when we talk about the idea of a name, of the different names of God, names are important because names are how we identify someone or something. And in the scriptures, we can find different stories in which either God declares a name or in which people give God a name. And so to name a few, there is Jehovah Nisi, which is translated, the Lord is my banner. There is Jehovah Rapha, which is translated, the Lord that heals. Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is peace. Jehovah Raha, the Lord my shepherd. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. Jehovah Shammah, the Lord is there. And there's many, many others that we can find in Scripture. And today what I want to do is I want to take a few of these particular names of God, and I want to talk about them. I want to talk about where they originated, the stories we find them in, and then how we can find meaning and comfort and hope in those particular names of God. And so there are three different ones that I want to talk about today. And the first one is this name, it's El Shaddai, El Shaddai. And we see in Genesis 17:1 is one instance where this name El Shaddai shows up. And it's God is speaking to Abram, who would later become Abraham. But it says this, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am El Shaddai. Walk with me and be trustworthy. I will make a covenant between us, and I will give you many, many descendants. We see it again in Genesis 28:3 when Isaac is speaking to his son Jacob. It says, El Shaddai will bless you, make you fertile, and give you many descendants so that you will become a larger people. In Genesis 35:11, God is speaking to Jacob and says, I am El Shaddai, be fertile and multiply. A nation, even a large group of nations, will come from you. Kings will descend from your own children. And those are just a few instances where El Shaddai is used in the scriptures. And it's interesting to me that almost all of the instances that El Shaddai is used as a name for God in the Old Testament, it's in reference to God promising this idea of fertility and blessing people with descendants and increasing their numbers. And so there's like this imagery of fertility and pregnancy and childbirth. Now, in our English Bibles, El Shaddai is most often translated as God Almighty. So this stems from the opinion that Shaddai is connected with the verb lishdad, which means to destroy or to overpower. However, the word Shaddai actually is grammatically much closer and is closer connected to the word shad in Hebrew, which means breast. So when a Hebrew word ends with I, that A-I, because Shaddai is spelled S-H-A-D-D-A-I, when a Hebrew word ends with I, it almost always means my. So literally translated, El Shaddai could mean God is my breast, which is a little interesting. But here's the thing. In our culture, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that we live in a culture that over-sexualizes people, particularly women. And our bodies as women are often seen as existing for the pleasure and enjoyment for men. They're seen as existing for someone else, and it often we are over sexualized and sort of dehumanized and kind of seen as just this body that exists to bring pleasure to others, or we are oftentimes made to feel that our bodies are something to hide or to be ashamed of, or that cause men to stumble. But here in this beautiful, powerful feminine metaphor, we see God is actually being compared to elements of a woman's body. A woman's body can be capable of growing new life, and a woman's breast is the symbol of nourishment and sustenance and of deep connection between mother and child. And so with this interpretation, we see God as a God who nourishes us, who sustains us, who draws us close and is our sufficiency. It helps us to see God as not as this distant or far off figure, but one who is deeply connected to us and desires to sustain us and to bless us and to nourish us and to nurture and care for us. So that is one of the names of God that we see and some of the meaning that we can draw from it. The next one that I want to talk about is this name for God, and that is Jehovah Jireh. And if you grew up in church and maybe like grew up in like a, I don't know, maybe like a more Pentecostal church or like a more kind of charismatic church, And maybe this was sung in mainline churches, but did anybody ever sing that song when you were a kid? Or was it, maybe it wasn't even just in kids' church, but it was like this song called Jehovah Jireh. I'm not going to sing it for you, but if you know it, you can put the lyrics in the chat, and then you guys can all kind of like, in your head sing along. But that was a song that I heard all the time growing up. And this name for God, Jehovah Jireh, comes from a story that we find in the book of Genesis, in Genesis 22. And this is the story of Abraham and Isaac. This is a very well-known story, one that I will say that if you have kiddos with you right now listening in and watching, this story might be a little disturbing for kids to hear. So if you want to have them not listen to this, that would be absolutely okay. But this is a story of Abraham and Isaac being the son who was promised to Abraham by God, who was to be the beginning of many descendants in this strong nation that God promised to raise up through Abraham. And Abraham finally has this promised son. His wife Sarah finally is able to bear a child, and the story tells us that one day God tells Abraham to take Isaac up into the mountains and to offer him as a sacrifice. Now, this story has always been a tough one for me. It's one of those stories in the Bible that I think should make us pause and start asking a lot of questions. And I used to just take it at face value and always interpreted it the way that most preachers I knew interpreted it. And that was this, that God told Abraham to kill his son because God wanted to test Abraham to see if he would be willing to give up the thing that was most important to him, that he'd be willing to give that up for God, that he would be obedient no matter what, even if it meant killing his only son. And then in turn, we were supposed to be that obedient too, that we would be willing to do whatever God asked us, no matter how wild it sounded or no matter how much that thing meant to us. And when you really sit down and think about that, that's pretty morbid, right? Like, it's pretty brutal and actually a little or a lot messed up to think that God would tell someone to kill their own child. And I mean, think about it. If you knew someone and they told you that God told them to kill their child, we would immediately think that they needed serious psychological help, right? And for me, seeing this story in that way makes God out to be a tyrant at best and a monster at worst. But what if this story is saying something entirely different about God? What if this is telling us something entirely different? We have to remember that the writers of the scriptures lived in a particular time, in a particular culture, and they saw the world in very particular ways. And in these ancient times, people were trying to figure out how the world worked and how to explain their lives and the things that were happening to them and around them. I mean, we're still doing this today, right? We're still trying to make sense of life and why we're here and why things happen. And much about early civilizations was about survival. And people learned that their survival was largely dependent upon some force that they couldn't see. So people would come to the conclusion that if good things were happening to them, that meant that the gods, because like we said, there were multiple gods that people worshipped, that meant the gods were pleased with them. But if bad things happened, then they assumed that they hadn't done enough to please those gods. And in order to keep the gods happy, they would offer sacrifices to do so. If they had a good season of crops, they would offer a sacrifice of thanks. If they had a bad season of crops, they would offer a sacrifice to atone for whatever they had done that upset the gods, that caused them not to have a good season of crops. And in living within this sacrificial system, there is always more you have to give, more you have to sacrifice, more you have to do to keep those gods happy. And in that day, child sacrifice was not uncommon among various groups of people. Now, we do see in the scriptures there are lots of times where God actually commands people to say that that is not something that the people of God should do. But however, that was something that happened. I mean, what greater sacrifice if someone is thinking, I need to make the biggest sacrifice I could possibly make in order to keep the gods happy, in order to survive. I mean, what greater sacrifice could one make than to offer their own child? And again, it's morbid and it's horrible, but that's what a sacrificial system eventually leads to. And we see in this story that when God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son, Abraham doesn't hesitate, because again, sacrifice is just what you did. And so we're going to go ahead and read from Genesis 22, verses 2 and 3. So God says to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you." The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. So they go, they do this, they travel for 3 days, and then they arrive in Moriah. And Abraham says to his servants, he says, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will travel a little further. We will worship there, and then we will come right back." So Abraham tells them, like, Abraham's going to sacrifice Isaac, and yet Abraham tells his servants, "But Isaac and I will both be returning." And then as we read further, and he's preparing the altar, and when Isaac asks where the sacrifice is, Abraham responds with, "The Lord will provide." The Lord will provide. And then Abraham binds Isaac, and he even goes so far as to put him on the altar. And the scriptures say that he raises his knife to make the sacrifice, but the last second is stopped by an angel, or by the Lord's messenger, as some translations put it. And then a ram appears in the bushes, and Abraham unties Isaac and sacrifices the ram instead. And then he names the place Jehovah Jireh, or the Lord will provide. And then the Lord's messenger tells Abraham that he will be blessed beyond measure, and that he will be given countless descendants. So not only did God provide a sacrifice, but God promises to continue giving and to continue blessing and providing for both Abraham and all of his descendants for generations. So back to my earlier question, in this time of sacrificial systems and gods that were known for their brutality, what if this story is saying something entirely different about this God? What we see in this wild story is that the God of Abraham is different from the other gods. See, the other gods demand that you give and give and give and give and give, but in this instance, God is the one doing the giving. God is the one doing the providing. The other gods would demand that you give up your child, but not this God. This God is different. This God is one who gives and blesses and provides freely. So this name of God, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides, is a name that, as we reflect on this story of Abraham and Isaac, and we see the way that the Lord provided, it serves to remind us that we have a God who isn't seeking what we can give and demanding more and more and more from us in order for us to experience provision and care, but God is freely giving to us. God is providing for us. God is caring for us. And then lastly, I have one more name of God that I want to talk about today. And that name of God we find in Genesis chapter 16. We find this in the story of an enslaved, dark-skinned Egyptian woman named Hagar. Now, this also follows the life of Abraham and Sarah. This takes place before the story that I just read, before the birth of Isaac. Hagar was a slave to Sarah, who was the wife of Abraham. Sarah was barren, and in that day, being unable to bear children had much greater consequences than just the emotional heartbreak of longing for a child and not being able to have one. It was also about preserving the family line. It was about safety and security for the mother in the future. And in Abraham and Sarah's case, it was also about a seemingly unfulfilled promise that God had given them about being the mother and father of a whole nation. Because Sarah was getting older and still hadn't been able to conceive, she decided to take matters into her own hands. And she told Abraham, she said, "Here, you can sleep with my slave Hagar so that Sarah could have children through her." So he does, and Hagar becomes pregnant. And I want us to think about this for a minute, about what is actually happening here. We don't see anywhere in this story where Hagar gives consent to this or has any kind of say. She was enslaved, so she was to do what her mistress required of her, including giving of her own body. Can you even imagine how that must have felt for her? And then as we read further in the story, it tells us that Sarah starts to have some serious issues with Hagar. She tells Abraham that since becoming pregnant, that Hagar has been treating her with contempt. And then Abraham tells Sarah, just do whatever you want with her. So then Sarah proceeds to abuse Hagar so severely that Hagar runs away into the desert. She decides to free herself from her oppressor, and in doing so finds herself pregnant and alone and unprotected in the wilderness. Can you imagine how terrifying this would be, to be pregnant and you're fleeing from abuse and oppression and you have no one? And it's there in the wilderness that Hagar is found by a stream of water by an angel of the Lord. And then we're going to go ahead and read in Genesis chapter 16, verses 8 through 11. It says, "The angel said to her, 'Hagar, Sarah's servant, where have you come from and where are you going?' 'I am running away from my mistress Sarah,' she replied. The angel of the Lord said to her, 'Return to your mistress and submit to her authority.' Then he added, 'I will give you more descendants than you can count.'" Now, just a side note here before we move on, the idea of Hagar being told to return to her enslaved existence is something that, quite honestly, doesn't sit well with me, and I have a lot of questions. There's some scholarly work that suggests this was for her own protection, that it was better for her to be with Sarah and Abraham so she and her child could survive. There is some work that suggests that this serves to point to the tendency of some religious communities to side with the abuser and silence the voices of victims. I'm still wrestling with this and processing it and learning more. There's a book right now I'm reading called Sisters in the Wilderness that is all about this idea of Hagar, and so yeah, I'm just learning and processing. But for now, what I want to do is focus on what happens next. So after Hagar receives this word from the angel of the Lord, in verse 13 it says this, "Thereafter Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, 'You are El Roi. You are the God who sees me.'" You are the God who sees me. And what's really cool about this is Hagar is actually the first person in the scriptures to name God. In all other instances before this, we see God kind of naming God's self. But here, Hagar, an enslaved, an oppressed, dark-skinned foreigner in the land, is the first person to name God. And this name she gives God, El Roi, the God who sees me, is so powerful. To have a God, when she is in this place of pain and oppression and suffering and fear, to be able to recognize that she has a God who sees her. To have a God who truly sees us in our pain, who sees us in our suffering, who sees us when we feel invisible or misunderstood, a God who sees us in our grief and who sees us when we have questions and doubts, who sees us when life isn't turning out how we thought it should. I know for me, one of the things that makes me feel most loved is when someone really sees me. You know how that feels? Like when someone, they get you, they like see all the parts of you, and they love you for who you are despite flaws and imperfections and your quirks and all of that. Someone who can acknowledge that who I am and what I feel and what I think is valid and that it matters, that makes me feel so seen and therefore makes me feel so loved. And so when I read this story, I feel like Hagar gave us all such a gift in choosing that name for God, El Roi, the God who sees me. What a gift to be able to see God in this way and to experience God as one who sees us, who truly sees us. And as we kind of wrap things up and we look at those 3 different names of God that we can find in the scriptures, and obviously there are so many more. I mean, goodness, I would invite you this week to kind of do some searches on that and really dive into that and study some of these other names of God. But as we wrap things up today, I want to leave all of us with the question: what name do you need God to show up as in your life right now? What name do you need God to show up as in your life right now? And I would also love to invite you to share that in the comments if you're comfortable. If there's right now you're like, man, I need God to provide. I need God to be my healer, to be my shepherd, whatever it is. I would love for you to share in the comments the name that you need God to show up as in your life right now. Do you need to know the God who sees you, who truly sees you for all of who you are? Do you feel like you're trapped in this cycle of performance and trying to earn your way to love, and you need to be reminded that God is Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides, that God is the one who gives and takes care and provides? Do you need God to show up as El Shaddai, the God who nourishes and cares for and tends to your soul, who holds you close and nurtures your spirit? Or maybe it's something else entirely. Maybe where you're at right now, you need God to show up in some other way. And here's what I think. And on most days, I believe this. I think there are some days where it's harder than others to believe this. But if God is who we believe God to be, then God is able to show up for you in the exact way that you need God to show up. If we really believe that God sees us, that God provides, that God nourishes and cares for our souls, that there are so many names of God and ways that God showed up for God's people in the scriptures, these stories, these examples for us to be able to look to and see the ways in which God showed up in the past. If we really believe God to be as big as we believe God to be, then I believe that God can show up in the exact way that we all need God to in whatever given moment. And I love how the scriptures show us so many facets of who God is, and that God is able to meet us in so many different ways. And so we're going to go ahead and finish up today and close out. And as we do, I just would love to pray for all of us, just that God would continue, that would show up and meet us right where we're at. That maybe God will show up in some new ways for you. Maybe you don't really know what you need, and maybe as you quiet your heart and as you kind of focus your intentions, maybe God will show up in some completely new way for you this week. Who knows? Who knows what could happen? So let's go ahead and pray together. God of many names, we are so grateful. I am so grateful that you cannot be put into a box, that you show up in so many ways to so many different people, that you show up in the ways that we need it most. And so today I pray that each person watching would be able to find, even if it's just a small quiet moment today or sometime throughout the week, that they can experience you showing up for them in whatever way they need most right now. So God, we turn our intentions toward you. We ask that you would help us to have clear minds, to be able to see and to hear and to experience the ways that you want to show up in our life this week. We love you so much. In your name I pray. Amen. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you all have a fantastic week. I hope you're able to find even just a small moment in the next few days to reflect and to contemplate on the names of God and to ask God to show up for you in whatever way you need God to. I love you all so much. I hope you have a fantastic week, And we will see you next week, both online and in person. And I hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday.